At 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on January 4, 2026, the geopolitical map of the Western Hemisphere was rewritten while America slept. For over a decade, the idea of a direct U.S. military intervention in Venezuela was dismissed by every serious analyst in Washington. It was known as the impossible scenario. The risks were simply too catastrophic. Analysts pointed to the dense urban sprawl of Caracas, a city of 3 million people, as a potential graveyard for U.S. Marines. They pointed to the sophisticated S-300VM air defense batteries purchased from Russia, which created an anti-access area denial bubble stretching all the way to the Caribbean islands. They said an invasion would turn into a second Vietnam. They said the economic fallout would shatter the global oil market. They were wrong. In a precision surgical strike lasting less than 48 hours, the United States military didn't just breach that impenetrable airspace. They dismantled the entire command structure of the Bolivarian regime. President Nicolás Maduro is currently in U.S. custody aboard a carrier strike group in the Atlantic. The Miraflores Palace, the fortress of the revolution, has fallen. But the headlines you are reading on CNN and Fox News are missing the real story. This wasn't just a political maneuver. It was a masterclass in 21st century hybrid warfare. It combined cyber warfare, signals intelligence, and kinetic special operations in a way modern history has never seen before. How do you dismantle a sovereign nation's defense in one night without triggering World War III? This is the definitive, minute-by-minute breakdown of Operation Liberty.
To understand the raid, we cannot start at the gunshot. We must rewind 48 hours. The decision to strike wasn't made in the Oval Office, at least not initially. It started with a ghost signal. Intelligence sources now confirm that on the morning of January 2nd, the National Security Agency, the NSA, intercepted a flash override communication. This is the highest priority designation for intercepted signals. It didn't come from a military base. It came from an encrypted device within the inner circle of the Cartel de los Soles, the Cartel of the Suns, the shadow organization run by high-ranking Venezuelan generals. For years, Washington tolerated the drug trafficking, but this message was different. It detailed a transfer scheduled for January 5th. The cargo was not cocaine. The intercept allegedly confirmed the arrival of medium-range ballistic missile guidance chips and fissile material precursors from a rogue state, believed to be smuggled via a commercial freighter docking in La Guaira. This crossed the red line secretly established by the U.S. administration and the Pentagon back in 2024. The assessment was stark. If these components were installed, Venezuela would possess the capability to strike Miami within 6 months. The threat had mutated from a regional nuisance into a direct existential threat to the U.S. mainland. At 1400 hours, under extreme secrecy, the president signed the executive order authorizing Operation Liberty. But the tactical planners at JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, knew that a standard invasion force would take weeks to assemble, giving Maduro time to hide the assets or launch them. They needed speed. They needed the element of total surprise. And so they orchestrated a massive global deception. Publicly, the Pentagon announced a routine large-scale naval exercise off the coast of Puerto Rico, dubbed Atlantic Shield. It was a bluff of massive proportions. While the world's media and Venezuelan intelligence focused on the aircraft carriers maneuvering publicly in the north, the real dagger was being sharpened in the south. Elite assets were moving into position at a classified forward operating base on the Colombian border. The players involved were the absolute Tier 1 units of the U.S. military, DevGru, commonly known as SEAL Team 6, tasked with securing the port facilities, and the Army's 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta Force, tasked with the most dangerous job on the planet, the high-value target extraction at Miraflores.
The operation faced one massive technological hurdle: the Russian-made air defense network. The S-300 and Buk M2 missile systems protecting Caracas are capable of tracking and destroying aircraft from hundreds of miles away. You cannot fly a helicopter through that net without being blown out of the sky. Standard doctrine would call for a cruise missile strike to destroy the radars, but explosions wake people up. Explosions start wars. JSOC needed silence. This is where U.S. Cyber Command took the lead. 4 hours before the helicopters lifted off, A dormant malware package, planted months prior inside the industrial control systems of the Guri Dam, was activated. The Guri Dam supplies 80% of Venezuela's electricity. At exactly 2300 hours, the turbines didn't stop. They desynchronized. The safety protocols tripped. A cascade failure rippled across the national grid. Within seconds, Caracas went dark. Streetlights died. Cell towers switched to backup batteries, then failed. But most importantly, the search radars of the air defense network lost their primary power. They were forced to switch to diesel generators, causing a momentary reboot cycle. That reboot lasted only minutes, but for the pilots of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers, minutes are an eternity. Under the cover of this artificial darkness and heavy electronic jamming from circling Growler aircraft, 4 stealth-modified MH-60M Blackhawks and 2 heavy-lift Chinooks crossed the coastline. These weren't standard helicopters. They utilized the same noise reduction technology found on the helicopters used in the Bin Laden raid. They flew nap of the earth, literally skimming the jungle canopy, sometimes feet above the trees, to hide in the ground clutter of any remaining radar systems. Inside the lead bird, the operators of Delta Force sat in silence. They checked their weapons, customized HK-416 assault rifles. They checked their connectivity. They had been rehearsing this exact raid in a full-scale mock-up facility in North Carolina for 6 months. They knew the number of steps in the stairwell. They knew which floorboards in the hallway would creak. Team Alpha would secure the perimeter, neutralizing the outer guard posts. Team Bravo, the assault element, would fast rope directly onto the roof of the executive wing. They had one rule of engagement: speed is security. Hesitation is death.
03 a.m. Touchdown. The silence of the Caracas night was shattered not by sirens, but by the controlled detonation of linear breaching charges blowing the reinforced steel doors of the roof access. Simultaneously, 2 miles away, a massive diversionary explosion was triggered at a military barracks by local CIA assets. This was critical. It drew the bulk of the loyalist colectivos, paramilitary biker gangs, away from the palace, thinking the coup was coming from the army barracks. Inside the palace, the resistance from the Presidential Honor Guard was fierce but chaotic. The blackout had severed their communications. Commanders couldn't issue orders. They were fighting as individuals, blind in the dark corridors. Delta Force, however, was not blind. Equipped with GPN-VG-18 panoramic night vision goggles, which provide a 97-degree field of view in white phosphorus clarity, the operators moved with surgical precision. To them, the pitch-black hallways were as bright as day. Room by room, floor by floor, they cleared the residence. Flashbangs, double taps, move. The efficiency was terrifying. It took exactly 8 minutes to clear the top 2 floors. Intelligence indicated Maduro was likely in the Situation Room in the basement bunker, a Cold War-era shelter designed to withstand a direct bomb hit. The breaching team cut through the blast doors using thermal lances. But when the doors fell and the team stormed the room, it was empty. Coffee cups were still warm, chairs were overturned, but the target was gone. For a terrifying 60 seconds, Mission Control in Washington held its breath. Had the intelligence failed? Was there a tunnel? If Maduro escaped into the city, the operation would turn into a prolonged manhunt, a disaster reminiscent of Mogadishu. Then, a K-9 unit accompanying the team alerted to a bookshelf in the adjacent private library. A thermal imaging scan revealed a heat signature behind the wood, a panic room, retrofitted recently and not present on the original blueprints. The operators didn't knock. They breached the wall. As the dust settled, they found him. President Nicolás Maduro, along with 2 of his top generals, was huddled inside. There was no last stand, no cinematic gunfight. Confronted by the barrel of a Delta Force rifle, the regime surrendered without firing a shot. Jackpot. The code word was relayed via satellite link to the White House Situation Room. At 03:14 a.m., the man who had outlasted sanctions, coups, and protests was zip-tied and hooded. Getting in is hard. Getting out is nearly impossible. By now, the element of surprise was gone. The blackout backup generators at the air bases had kicked in. the Venezuelan Air Force, though dilapidated, still had operational Su-30 flanker fighter jets. As the extraction helicopters lifted off from the palace courtyard with the high-value target on board, radar warning receivers began to scream. 2 Venezuelan jets had scrambled from a base in Maracay. This was the moment the U.S. Navy had been waiting for. Lurking high above in the stratosphere, F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters from the carrier group finally unmasked themselves. They didn't even need to fire their missiles. They simply painted the Venezuelan jets with their targeting radar, a digital lock-on that creates a distinct, terrifying tone in the enemy pilot's headset. The message was clear: turn back or die. Facing superior technology and overwhelming odds, the Venezuelan pilots disengaged. The corridor was safe. By sunrise, Nicolás Maduro was on board the USS Gerald R. Ford in international waters. A video of his capture, verifying his identity and condition, was released to the world 2 hours later.
The reaction was instantaneous and violent. Global oil prices spiked 15% in minutes, the largest single-day jump in history, before stabilizing as the U.S. announced it would secure the oil fields. In Moscow, the Kremlin condemned the act as state-sponsored piracy and placed its nuclear forces on high alert. In Beijing, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs urged maximum restraint, visibly shaken by the speed of the American operation. But the most poignant scenes were in Caracas. As the sun rose over a city still largely without power, people poured into the streets. There was confusion, yes. Fear of what comes next, absolutely. But as images of the empty palace circulated on social media, crowds began tearing down the massive banners of the regime. The U.S. military proved that in the 21st century, the era of massive, slow-moving invasions is over. Modern warfare is about data, speed, and the lethal integration of cyber and kinetic force. But now the adrenaline fades and the hard reality sets in. Invasion is easy. Occupation is a nightmare. The United States has decapitated a government, but it has also created a massive power vacuum in the heart of South America. Who fills that void? A democratic transition government? A vengeful military junta? Or will Venezuela descend into a civil war between loyalists and the opposition? Operation Liberty achieved its tactical goal perfectly, but strategically, did it solve a crisis, or did it just light the fuse for a much larger global conflict? We are entering uncharted waters. Was this a necessary intervention to stop a nuclear threat, or a dangerous overreach of American empire? And what happens to the global energy market now that Venezuela is in play? I want to know your analysis. Leave your prediction in the comments below. For a deep dive into the specific Ghost Hawk helicopters used in this raid, click the video on the right. And for more unclassified breakdowns of modern warfare, subscribe to the channel.